on Breakfast at BBC Radio Leeds. Now, throughout breakfast this morning, reading, watching, listening to the events in Paris yesterday and the murder of 12 people in the satirical magazine headquarters of Charlie Hebdo. We're getting reaction in West Yorkshire to what happened, and perhaps even more importantly now, what happens next, as those murderers claim what they were doing was in the name of Islam. George Galloway, who is the Respect MP for Bradford West, is joining us now on Breakfast. Good morning. How are you, George?
Very well, thank you.
You've issued a statement quite strongly worried, concerned with, being quite prescriptive about what you think should happen next. Tell me what that is.
Well, when you're in a hole, you've got to stop digging. That's the first thing you have to do, even if you don't know how to get out of the hole. And this path of confrontation onto which we, in Western governments and a substantial section of the Muslim community, are locked into this path of confrontation, with one atrocity in one place begetting another atrocity somewhere else, has got to stop. Otherwise, we're sliding. I feel a bit like the start of the First World War 100 years ago, exactly, where nobody quite knew what to do differently, so they just kept on sliding. And these atrocities, which happen, of course, on a much larger scale in the Muslim world, in Peshawar, in Pakistan, just the other week, where over 100 school children were killed. In Syria, every day, where Britain, France, and the United States have been, for the last 4 years, sowing the seeds of this kind of fanaticism. And now in Paris, and of course 10 years ago, almost exactly, coming up in London, on the London Underground. One atrocity after another, each one being used as justification for the next, is a hole, all right. And if we don't stop digging, we'll soon be out of sight.
Well, it's a hole, as you've defined it, but you are suggesting that if the West continues on this, you've defined it as a course of confrontation with much of the Muslim world, and the hole's going to get deeper. What if it were up to you then on this Thursday morning at 7:51? What would you do?
Well, I'd stop doing the things that we are doing. I'd do as Patrick Coburn in the Independent newspaper, Britain's foreign correspondent of the year, most years, suggested in the Syrian track, we need to have a ceasefire. We have to stop our involvement in this war, because it's that war and the Iraq war before it that made these Al-Qaeda maniacs, these heart-eating, head-chopping madmen so strong. They are proliferating directly as a result. You can trace it. There were a few hundred Al-Qaeda before Bush and Blair invaded and occupied Iraq. Now there are a few 100,000 at the very, very least, and they are in our own midst. These people that are suspects in Paris that the police are searching for, they didn't come from the Tora Bora, they're French. They were born in France, they're French citizens with police records in France. The people who blew up the London Underground and a London bus a decade ago were born and raised in Britain, some of them in our own area. This is proliferating everywhere, as I warned Mr. Blair that it would, as the head of the British Security Services warned Mr. Blair that it would. Our policies are helping to spread fanaticism and extremism, particularly amongst young Muslims, in every part of the world. Extremism is cascading everywhere.
And the argument that if we do as you suggest, stop the fighting in Syria, have a ceasefire, no longer pursue what's going on to stop what the ISIS activity in parts of the Middle East, that's giving in. That's letting them roll.
But there was no ISIS in the Middle East before we invaded and occupied it. There is now, because we invaded and occupied it. You don't need a PhD in international politics to track that. It's not, of course, one way, as I think, made clear. This vaulting extremism and fanaticism amongst some Muslims, by no means all, of course, and a very small minority, but it's still a minority of 2 billion people, can be a lot of people. This fanaticism on their part of course, fuels the war drums and the rise of far-right extremism and so on. But we're in a big confrontation. There's no doubt about that. The Islamophobia, hatred, fear of Muslims and Islam is clear for all to see. Even in our own country, it's worse in France. And equally, we're involved in raining down bombs and missiles on Muslims in many other parts of the world. If people can't see that that's a path towards a mutual self-destruction, then they need to open their eyes.
George Galloway, I appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Welcome.
The Respect MP for Bradford West. Here's our number, 0345